All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. And I do not have a microphone, but I will try to talk loud so everybody can hear me. But at the same time, I don't bite, so if you want to move closer, you're welcome to. My name is Stephanie Darden. I am President and Creative Director of FDG Creative. I recognize a few friendly faces from the last room, so thanks for coming to the next room with me. And I'm here today to talk to you about being social-wise and how social media has played a part in a very important project to us that we've been working on for a little while now in helping us really overcome stigma and Nimbyism in the neighborhood. And just for a little bit of background into who I am so that you have some sort of sense of, all right, maybe she's qualified to talk about this today. So again, I'm the owner of this company. We're a women-owned small business. It's actually 11 of us, and I love my small but mighty team. We actually have a national real estate experience that spans coast to coast in a variety of different states and markets. In terms of branding and marketing, we've worked on real estate development projects in excess of $3.2 billion. We have 2 offices, one in Orlando, which is our headquarters, and we just opened a new one in New Orleans. Currently, we have 19 different active social media campaigns that we're managing for different real estate projects. And since opening in 2002, we've worked on over 180 different real estate projects. Most of them have been singular apartment communities, but most recently, some of the work has involved more complex master planned developments. So today, the case study that I'm going to share with you is Columbia Park. And basically, as we're all aware of, Hurricane Katrina blew through New Orleans in 2005. Our project, this is what it looked like, basically, a few days after Katrina. This is a few days after Katrina had passed through. So some of the water had subsided. You can even start to see some of the evaporation lines. It was a few feet taller than that. This was the St. Bernard Public Housing Development. It housed, had over 900 units on site, approximately 1,400 individuals living there. And it had been a community in place since the 1940s. And overnight, everything changed. So they took on between 6 and 10 feet of water, throughout the different, aspects of the development. And this is actually the neighboring church, as you can see, was also flooded as well. Fast forward to January 2009, so almost 3.5 years later. I get a phone call from a client that I'd worked with prior at Bank of America's Community Development Corporation, Jim Growley, and now he's at Columbia Residential. And he called and hadn't heard from him in a few years. And out of the blue, it's this familiar voice. And he's like, we've got a project. It's a big one. It's complicated. There's a lot of challenges. Would you be interested in working on it? And again, loved working with him. He always had a great team, great projects. So my immediate answer was yes, but I'm like, I really want to check this out, though, on the ground. So next week, went and took my very first tour of the site and was scared to death. A lot of challenges ahead of us, visually, nonetheless. So basically, that first site visit included Jim and I driving around the perimeter of the development site, and it was lovingly referred to as the Ring of Devastation. And essentially, there were weeds that were 12 feet tall that were towering over most single-family homes in the area. There were a variety of single-family homes that were completely devastated, had been completely abandoned and sitting there since 2005, and no one was there to clean it up or remove it. So mounds of debris. There were still the spray paint marks throughout the community on all different doors and garage doors, indicating that troops had come in, had scouted out for victims or for bodies or live people, even animals, and so these were all still there. So it was shocking, and I have to admit this was the biggest challenge I had ever experienced. And we are very familiar with going into areas of disinvestment with developers and projects that are really the first of their kind, to kind of be the catalyst for additional revitalization. And this was just that, but it was that on steroids. At the same time, I love a good challenge, and nothing gets the creative mind going faster than a real challenge. So in terms of the project overview, Columbia Park is a mixed-use, mixed-income apartment community. It's on the former St. Bernard Public Housing site, as I mentioned. The vision behind Columbia Park was based on the East Lake model, which you may be familiar with in Atlanta. So again, it was housing, education, and recreation as these cornerstones. And so that was very much in line with the vision for this new place that they were creating, the Bayou District, which is where Columbia Park was going to be located. It would include recreational components, multifamily housing, as well as an early learning center, K-8 charter school, a high school, recreation center, and also City Park, which I've learned in all of this is our nation's second largest public park. It's it dwarfs, Central Park in New York City dwarfs City Park in New Orleans. And that's, 4 blocks away from this site. So plans for the master development also included doing some renovations to that park. Columbia Park specifically was comprised of 4 phases. Phase 1, 466 units of mixed income housing, a third public, a third affordable, and a third market rate. Phase 2 was 97 mixed income units. Phase 3 was 120 senior housing units. And then Phase 4 is retail and commercial development. Build a 20-foot wall around it. That was the quote that will forever be stuck in my brain. The very first project meeting that I had, that same visit when I was in town, we met with a high-ranking official with the police department. And basically, this developer, again, one of my favorites, because what I love about the way they operate is even though we're branding and marketing, we can be exposed and involved in any part of this process that we want to be. And we want to be exposed and a part of as much as we can to soak it all up. So I was invited to attend this meeting, and I sat in just listening, and build a 20-foot wall around it was his advice, because he could not guarantee safety. He also said it wouldn't be a bad idea to electrify that wall when you're done building it. In no way, shape, or form should this be an open grid street system community plan. You should, again, you need to prevent, the elements from being there. That was his philosophy and his theory. So it was definitely a challenge, going into it. And he proceeded to talk about how historically, this was the worst public housing site in New Orleans. They would station a police dispatch unit underneath the overpass 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The overpass was about half a block away from the first units at St. Bernard, because it was just a matter of time before there would be another shooting or stabbing. And so it was just easier for everybody if we just had somebody sitting there 24 hours a day. So this is very nonchalant way he's describing it all. And, and again, in my brain, at one hit, it's like, wow, this is incredible. The flip side, it's like, how exciting for what's going to happen next for this community, because I know this developer and I know that they deliver. So this is, for all intents and purposes, when you say St. Bernard public housing, this is what people think of. This is what it looked like right up until Katrina rolled through. It's, again, it's barrack-style public housing, very, small units, very compact, close together. And it was absolutely crime infested. This neighborhood, had a horrible reputation. So in terms of the situation outlook, this project we were about to work on was going to be the very first of New Orleans' big 4 public housing redevelopment projects. We were dealing with this devastated surrounding post-Katrina neighborhood. There's nothing we can do about it. It's just going to look that way till something else happens from someone else's doing. The former resident protests erupted continually over the fact that there was not going to be one-for-one replacement. Again, there were 900 public housing units before Katrina. There were roughly going to be, a third of that, moving forward. There was also a lot of skepticism because the developer was not local. They weren't New Orleans based. And New Orleans is a very local, close-knit, tight-knit, community. And so there was a lot of ground to cover to show that you weren't just here to turn a buck, and that you actually made promises that you kept. And that was up to the developer to hold up their end of it, but we were very aware of that was an important overriding characteristic and what we needed to accomplish as well. And also, this was a relatively unseen mixed-income model in New Orleans. They'd basically been pretty sheltered. There's a lot of other cities that have great, innovative mixed-income housing projects that have happened for a while now. And it's not that there hadn't been any there, but the one that had happened most recently, in similar nature in terms of the composition of incomes, talking to just about anybody in town, and they called it a failure. And the reputation it had was for mismanagement, and the mismanagement had led to the fact of crime had seeped back into this place. So again, that's when you talked about mixed income housing, that was the first thing most people in town would say is, we don't want another one of those. We know what that is, and mixed income housing does not work, and that's what it looks like. So this project was one of the first to bring high quality mixed income housing to New Orleans, and one of its predecessors, as I mentioned, sorry, I'm ad-libbing as you can tell, And also the neighborhood possessed a fierce reputation as that hotbed of a lot of drugs, a lot of violent crime, and murders. These were not petty crimes. I mean, this is the top end of the spectrum. So we put our thinking caps on, and in terms of all the things that we could do, in terms of branding and marketing, what was to come. There's all types of ways you can go about communicating, and we look back and rely on this hierarchy of effective media, basically, or media effectiveness. And at the very top of this, I want you guys to pay attention to actual experiences, virtual experiences, and recommendations from trusted sources. These are really important, and you're going to see a lot of this come into play with this case study as I share it with you today. At the very bottom end of the spectrum, marketing in formats or environments unacceptable to potential renters, and marketing in formats and environments acceptable. These are ads. These are just place an ad somewhere. Whether it's an acceptable ad, an unacceptable place might be, maybe it's a fringe kind of, publication that's got some questionable material in it, placing an ad in there. That's the lowest end of the totem pole. Great place for prostitutes and drug dealers to reproduce like rabbits. We would monitor the social sphere and the blogs throughout the duration. And this was pulled from, as I'm sure many of you experience the same things, I would imagine. You'd have an article written on what's to come and what the plans include. And then you start to see this roll call of people's comments. And it just blows your mind. And I've sampled a few of those and have kept them in this presentation just so you can get a feel for what was out there. So we're going to spend taxpayer dollars to build better housing than I own for blanks who don't work, just sit around and make babies. Give it a year, it will be St. Bernard Part 2 all over again. I mean, these are quotes, and these were in blogs, these were in comments left after articles, and this was everywhere. And these are just pieces and parts, and not even the worst of it. So again, we're monitoring this, we're seeing this. We have to be aware that that's what people are saying, and then we're always having to figure out how can we now combat that. So our strategy, in looking at all the moving pieces and parts and our real challenges, we knew first and foremost we had to build a strong brand. I'm a brand fanatic. Don't do a thing if you haven't figured out and you're not concentrating on your community or your development's brand. You have to pay attention to it. Everything stems forward from that. That's the seed of everything. We also knew we wanted to create a communicative community via social media. We wanted to support it with a website that includes diverse information and content offerings. And this was important, and I'll say this, because one of the other things that people would say, and this is 2009, and not our development team, but rather people you'd come across in these team meetings on the ground in New Orleans that, again, they're not necessarily privy to clearly new trends and really the state of affairs, but why would you create a website? Public housing residents, they're not on the internet. Affordable residents, they don't have the internet. Why? Why would you put money and effort into social media and your website? Because this is just, good luck with that. And we wanted to also harness the power of authenticity to help tell the story of this innovative mixed income community. First and foremost, just underneath the brand was evolving affordable housing, the brand that affordable housing had in that community. And we needed to do it in unexpected ways, using unique online and offline engagement approaches. It was incredible, the lack of knowledge that was even happening with some of the local politicians. They really weren't aware of the face of affordable housing and really who lives at it and why this is really important and why it works. And so that was a part of our campaign and our strategy as well. And our biggest guiding principle in all of this was we wanted to create community before building a community. We put so much effort into creating a sense of community before that place was even tangible and ready to move into. For Columbia Park, their audience composition was pretty diverse. There was a lot of people paying attention to this project. They had a lot at stake. It was the very first one. And so their composition was interesting. And the other part of it were former residents versus new residents and prospects. Also lenders and partners, the media, competitors, and the general public played a very big part of that audience composition. The former residents as well, that was a very interesting part of this campaign because before that, I had never experienced a campaign where we had to now find strategies and ways that we could market and brand and advertise and communicate both in market where most of our prospects come from, but then also track down and find and communicate with former residents that had evacuated and had not returned. And that was a really interesting experience, and it relied upon it was going into it was great. I mean, there was a certain amount of advertising we were required to do legally in newspapers, and then there was a lot of stuff that we did online, and online absolutely played a huge role. And we've proven that by virtue of when you start to look at the web traffic statistics for Columbia Park, you can see geographically what states and what cities people are coming from. When I compare and contrast that with the addresses that have been kept on file by Hano for where residents documented that they evacuated or moved to, you start to see, all right, there's a ton of people in Houston. We've got a lot of traffic from Houston. We've got a lot of population from Atlanta. So you connect those dots. So again, that was interesting. So I mentioned some of these things that we really wrapped ourselves tightly around, and one of which was not scrimping on this website. This website, we put a lot of energy and a lot of effort in, because we were said this project's full name is Columbia Park at the Bayou District. The Bayou District meant nothing to anybody. It didn't exist. It was a new name that was devised by the development team. And so what we ended up doing is the background of the website, you'll start to see City Park, and there's Columbia Park out there, because even in the background ancillary noise of everything we were doing, we also had to help people understand what part of New Orleans this was in and identify it, because we don't want you saying St. Bernard anymore. You know, we want you to understand where this is, and we want you to start, understanding this as a new page has been turned. And I'm also happy to say that as of last week, the website won the 2012 Pillars of the Industry Award as well. So different snippets from the website, you can start to see the brand being activated within this. And this is important because in terms of helping to rebrand affordable housing, when most general public thinks affordable housing, they think cheap, uninspiring, kind of status quo. And that's not the case. We know in affordable housing, there's so much innovation happening. And but simultaneously, we knew we had to take care to make sure that this looked like market rate. We didn't want this to look like you had to sacrifice or you couldn't afford to live in a nice place. Everybody, regardless of income, wants to live at an amazing place. You want to feel safe. You want to feel cared for. You want to feel like you're living in luxury. And so our strategy with any affordable housing, any public housing project, is always to ensure that we're communicating the highest level quality in terms of the brand. And so we took great strides and effort to make sure that the web presence supported that. There was a design your home feature. You could drag and drop all your furniture all over the place to figure out which one of these places was really going to be your next home. Print collateral was very interesting. It was a fold-out map-style brochure that went inside of a folder. You could start to take a virtual community tour of the different site plan. And this was important too, because you figure this gets very tricky for our end of it, but we're selling a dream in so many ways. We have to pray the developer can make that dream happen. But yet the fine balance is how much do you communicate, how much do you promise, and how do you integrate all of that. And so the site plan was really helpful. It allowed us to, again, we could start to paint the picture of what's to come by virtue of recreation center, early learning center, retail, and future phases of housing. And we did it in a very vague kind of way, but just so that people could see this, broader master plan development that was going to be taking shape. Site signage is huge. If you've got a project, unless it's like hidden under a rock, one of the best uses of available funding is going to be really putting a lot of effort and great quality into the look and feel of your construction site. That is drive-by traffic. No matter what we do, drive-by traffic continues to be at least 50% of the leads and the responses that we get from a community. And that's huge. And it's the one-time cost generally of putting together these signs and getting them installed, but once they're there, they're there. So what we also succeeded in doing with this campaign is, again, we had this horrendous ring of devastation around this development site. And so we can't control these weeds that are now 14, 15 feet tall. What we can control, though, is the way our site looks. And we can also now use our site for virtual billboards that tell the story of the brand. And so you start to see these different taglines, laugh, cry, shout. The 46-seat resident theater has that effect on you. These are all little ways in which we were able to intersperse and interject, different types of amenities and call to action. And again, it also enlivened this construction site. Emails was another big part of it. We having this great website, one of the mechanisms was we want to capture people's contact information. We want to build a subscribership of people that want to learn and be kept in the loop. So maybe you don't live here right now, but you might live here next time. And so we followed that up and continue to this day of doing monthly e-newsletters that go out. And the content that's focused on these e-newsletters includes anything from some of the on-site support service providers classes, the free classes that are offered, through events and activities happening in New Orleans general. It's a very diverse kind of mix of content and information, but there's always something to say. And then we also did affinity group outreach. And we crafted these different headlines. So 4-alarm deal, apartment home specials too hot to pass up. Those are for the firefighters. Teacher's pet, call us what you will, we like teachers and this new offer proves it. You have the right to remain silent. This special offer is only for a select few in blue. So again, we did these little, all it was basically double-sided printed letterhead. So part of it had these messages on it. The leasing team could then in Word, type up their little offer letter, their introduction, little custom message, put in an envelope, and send it out. So it was simple, but in the effect of being able to brand this still and pay attention to these different targeted audiences, that really helped us on the affordable housing side, because many of these people were what qualified our affordable housing, target audience. The Facebook page, very big deal for us. Social media was the #1 most important thing that we did, but #1 only because we used it for purposes other than the traditional throw a web or Facebook page up and see what happens. This is a screenshot as of today. There's almost 1,900 likes on this page, and it continues to go. And that's what's great, is we continue to add new people. This number just keeps climbing. So in terms of how we started using Facebook to, again, help us tell our story, get the word out, we would use it for asking questions. You would pose questions, and you'd never know what would happen. And that's another thing I'll say too, is it's a scary thing. I hear it at every time I speak. Someone's always saying, "What about letting people post? Aren't you afraid of that?" Well, if we're not babysitting it and really paying attention, absolutely I'm afraid of it. But if someone's there managing it and paying attention to what's going up there, no way. This is an authentic form of communication, and that's the end-all be-all for social media. The day you decide to not let people post or comment, hang it up and don't have your Facebook page anymore, because you're completely diluting and getting away from the purpose of social media. It's a two-way interaction. That's why it's called social media, and instead you're using it for an advertising platform. So, hold on tight to the magic of why it works. And so what we would start to do with these questions. So here's one. Residents, we need your help. What's been the biggest pleasant surprise you've encountered so far living at Columbia Park? Within minutes, 6:05, I posted this question. 6:12, we get the first response in. It just kept going after that. And the responses were priceless. These were things that either echoed some of the advertising or the branding that we did, but some of it was just great, and right down to the detail of the security staff, Derek, it's wonderful. And it just kept going and going and going. And so once we had all this, and what's important to point out with this is you now have individuals who have taken a moment to make a comment, they post it. All their friends in their social sphere see that post, that comment that they've made. So they've been exposed to Columbia Park at this point. So you start to see this grassroots spreading, this sense of, and we're not having to spend any money to make those impressions and that awareness happen. And furthermore, it's authentic and it's trusted. And think back on that pyramid I showed you. Those trusted sources, those recommendations for trusted sources, those are priceless. You have to earn them. You don't buy them. And for that reason alone, they're worth every penny that you can possibly put towards making sure you have a mechanism in place for gathering that. And then once we had that, though, we found other ways to kind of repurpose that and cross-pollinate it. This is actually a booklet, which I'll talk about in a minute, as part of a micro campaign we did, but you'll start to see we ended up incorporating these posts into this printed booklet. Now, just to be safe, the question came up at my last session, about privacy issues. Well, for one, as we're all aware, as soon as you get stuff up there and social media, it's gone. Look no further than the headlines with teachers that are fired because they posted a photo of themselves drinking on the weekend on Facebook. But even so, just as a courtesy, we blurred everybody's photos. This is actually how it looks. They're slightly blurred, and we took all the names out. We just called him Resident. And the first guy, Resident Hopeful, because he wrote, "I wished I lived there. It's very beautiful and has a lot to offer." So he's Resident Hopeful. And targeted ads. This was another really important thing too, just for using our money wisely. And I talked before about our need to communicate both in market and now in these very different diverse markets where we knew we had former residents, because it was our responsibility to make sure that they knew there's opportunity for you to move back and live here now. It's safe. You can come home. And we had to spread the word of that. But how we were going to do it was very complex. Direct mail we could have done, but it's so expensive. Print ads in newspapers, even the classified sections, it was so expensive. It was the most expensive thing we did. And we just had to do it from a legal perspective. But these targeted ads were phenomenal because you can now pick the geography, you can pick the age of the people that shows up in front of, the sex, the education level, their interests, employers, their relationship status as well. I mean, you can get so specific and targeted with it. It's definitely Big Brother. And just as a little example of that, it was just for fun. I went ahead and did one just for my company. And the insets that I used were, I wanted people that lived in the United States, who lived within 25 miles of Orlando, who were 18 and older, who liked skeet shooting. They listed that as one of their interests, and who also worked at the Walt Disney Company. Now this screenshot shows less than 20 people qualified. There were actually 12 people that qualified that meet that criteria. But isn't that incredible how exacting you can get with that? So a definite plus. And if you're not doing that kind of advertising, I highly recommend it because you're in complete control over your ad spend as well. It's the most, I describe it as the most liquid form of advertising. You start and stop it when you want. You set your budgets. What other form of advertising do you get the opportunity to do that in? Taxi cab confessions. I talk a lot, as you can tell already. Anytime I'd come to town, I would pick the brains of whoever I was around. So if it was at the rental car counter, if it was at the airport, or if it was in a taxi ride, I'd ask people, hey, have you heard about this? Or if you're looking for an apartment, how are you finding one? Or, any of these questions. And so there was one such trip, actually, I had family with me, and we were in New Orleans for Sugar Bowl, and they wanted to go and see the project I'd been working on. Got a taxi and took a ride out, and we're riding around, and the taxi driver didn't know what the heck we were doing, and we get there, and he starts talking, and he's like, oh, well, yeah, this used to be the St. Bernard public housing site, and well, it looks good now, but, it's just, watch, it's just going to go downhill from here, because they just let anybody in. Well, I'm part of the project team, and there's actually qualification process that you have to go through. And, if you're a violent criminal, you can't live here. This was very interesting to me because I'm like, clearly, there's some communication that needs to happen with regards to the qualification factors. So it was just fascinating to hear the inaccuracies. And again, the sentiment for him was, it looks nice now, but the people moving in are going to completely destroy it. Give it a couple years, and it's just going to be looking a mess. And they're letting anybody in, and so it's just a matter of time. And I had a great time of actually talking to him a little bit more about the way it was working. And by the end of the taxi ride, he asked me where the leasing center was located on site. So I was like, yes, all right. So again, one of the big overarching situations with this particular micro campaign is we wanted to introduce and educate the public and government officials on the faces of mixed income housing. Because there was so much out there that was just misinformation that wasn't understood. So we devised the People of Park micro campaign. And with this campaign, we ended up working with the on-site community support service provider and the leasing team, and actually aggregated stories and information and testimonials and interviewed different people that were coming to live here, that were in public housing units, that were going to be in affordable housing units, or that were going to be in market rate. And so we ended up taking that information and developed a microsite inside of the website called People of Park, where we wanted people to get familiar with who lives here, who calls Columbia Park home. And so what you're able to do through this is basically pick a person. And as you can see right now, we've taken and we've distorted them a little bit to hide their true identities. We also changed their names. Everything else is accurate. And you get a great glimpse into the multitude and variety and vibrant diversity of the resident composition at Columbia Park. So just as an example, this was a great one. Ty and his younger brother and sister lost their mother in December of 2009, and there was danger of the siblings ages 19, 18, and 16 being separated. So as the oldest, he was awarded custody of his sister. Since both of the brothers are employed, they combine income, and it allows them to live and afford the rent at Columbia Park so they can be independent and stay together. There were also, and I skipped right through it, unfortunately, in this one, but some of the other great stories were, there was a gentleman who was in his mid-40s who suffered a devastating heart attack. And he was always a lifetime worker, construction worker, but got to the point where, again, he can no longer work. He's on disability. He's called it home. And then there's also a doctor who relocated, I think from Chicago. Could live anywhere he wants to, could afford to live anywhere he wants to. He chose to live at Columbia Park, so we featured him. A real estate agent. This guy, I love him to death. He's one of the social butterflies at Columbia Park. And again, he's got a young family, could live anywhere, doing very well for himself. He's been living at Columbia Park. So it gave us an opportunity to show this definite, diverse cross-section of people and individuals so that at the end of the day, you had talking points, but that were real people that start to show you, yeah, no. Those comments we showed back a few minutes ago on these notes after articles? No, it's not drug dealers and prostitutes living here. You need to get to see some of the people that actually call this place home. So again, we needed to leverage challenges as an opportunity to engage the community in unexpected ways. How many of you know what crowdsourcing means? Some of you do now. All right. Well, I'm going to share this with those of you who don't, and if you don't worry. About 10% of most groups that I'm in front of do. All right. Whoopsie. Technical difficulty.
What is crowdsourcing? Let's start. What is crowdsourcing? Let's start right from the beginning. Crowdsourcing was coined in May 2006 when Jeff Howe wrote an article for Wired magazine called The Rise of Crowdsourcing. Since then, Jeff has become the king of crowdsourcing. Its definition? Crowdsourcing is the act of taking a job traditionally performed by a designated employee and outsourcing it to an undefined, generally large group of people in the form of an open call.
Okay, got that? So crowdsourcing has so much potential to go viral, and it has every potential because it totally relies upon engaging your community. So a really great story, and I wish I had a photo of this place, but imagine, if you will, how many of you know what a pump house parcel looks like? It looks like, okay, all right, one, it's usual, I know, it's a very unknown fact that I never would have known before going to New Orleans. It basically, the way I would describe it, it kind of looks like a mausoleum. There's small footprints, they're kind of elevated up. Well, this one sat right in front of Columbia Park, and it had been damaged by Katrina, and the Sewer and Water Board had, their timeline to fix it was going to be about 6 months after we started leasing and had the leasing center open, which didn't work for us. I mean, again, here we are, we're welcoming people and we're asking them to trust in this promise of what's to come, and the first thing you come across is this hideous mausoleum that's at the front doorstep that's falling apart on itself. And so we're at this meeting, and someone on the team starts talking about, well, what if we have a sign made? Let's get a sign made on, do a monument sign on this parcel. And instead, I flipped it, and it's like, well, what if instead we took the same budget? Those signs are not cheap. We take that same budget, and instead, let's create our first crowdsourcing initiative. And basically what we ended up doing was creating a call to artists to submit concepts. You had to live in New Orleans. You had to live in Orleans Parish. This was important because, again, we had to earn cool points and prove, even though we're an outside developer, we have local heart. We get it. We don't want someone from New York swooping in and getting this job. So we had very strict confines on, who and what we wanted to have happen in the participation of this. But essentially, we had 15 different artists that stepped up and submitted ideas, and every one of them was asked as part of this call to artists to incorporate the icon somehow. Because if we're not going to do sign, we still want to have it tie in, to what's to come in our neighborhood. And as you can see, big variety. Some were awesome and professional, and others, I just didn't quite know what to do with them, and I'm glad we had real judges there to kind of critique. We again, in the interest of building strong local bonds and relationships, we recruited, I think, 8 different individuals to sit on our judging panel. These were people that owned independent galleries in New Orleans. It was the curator at NOMA. So these were people that locals, and we want to bring them in and engage them in this decision-making process and vetting of all these 15 down to 3 concepts that we could move forward with public voting. And that's what we did. So they helped us get down to 3 concepts that everybody felt accomplished the needs, were executable, and the engineering, would absolutely hold up and stand the test of time. And so we created this voting platform inside of the Columbia Park website. And the purpose for that is we want to drive people into this website. Now, we timed all of this to happen, though. This is another important part of it. The timing was everything in this, in that this is, when we launched the call to artists, it was mid-October. By the time we launched public voting, it was the middle of December. We don't want to spend advertising and marketing dollars during the holidays for apartments. It just doesn't work. It's not a good use of money. But we still had a lot of ground to cover. We wanted to be the entity you think of when you think about apartments in New Orleans and where to live. So in terms of brand equity, we wanted to still be out there in the marketplace during this holiday season. And so this is our answer on how we made that happen. In 4 weeks' time, in terms of public voting, the statistics, we had over 5,300 website visits. 2,900 of them were unique visits. This means these were people that had never been to the website before and only reached that at this point now because of this contest. And the way we know that is because we used a novelty URL through this contest platform that we set up. So it's not like somebody hitting columbiapark.com would find this and we would calculate them. No, these are pure data and statistics of people that, had it not been for this crowdsourcing initiative, never would have visited this website, possibly. We had over 1,000 votes cast, and 53% of them became shoppers. Shoppers mean they voted or they looked at this page, but then they started clicking on floor plans and amenities and so on and so forth. So they started meandering through our virtual experience, which was this website. And we spent 0 advertising dollars. None, but we garnered 5,300 website hits. Which is incredible for that time of the year and for an apartment community. And today we now have this on our pump house parcel, and it welcomes people into the new Columbia Park. And this is an image of what's been built since then. This is actually the leasing center that's in the background. So how do we begin to measure success? Phase 1 is complete. Phase 2 is complete. Phase 3 is underway, and it's going to be complete by 2013, or January of 2013. Phase 4 is actually under development planning right now. They already have a temporary LSU like kind of community clinic set up as well, and we're working now on getting ready to launch Educare as well as the pre-K education provider. So in other ways of measuring success, the initiatives helped overcome market objections to this mixed income model, and it magnetized residents of the area. We succeeded in doing that. They showed up. We had wait lists. We exceeded all the leasing goals. 93% of the units were pre-leased within 2 months of the community formally opening. And then they were completely leased within 7 months ahead of schedule. We also activated the community's brand and helped it earn equity that still fuels leasing efforts today, and it eliminates the need for former advertising. We're not advertising at all anymore for any of their units. For Phase 2, for Phase 1, it's just now a brand engine that's continuing to go. And the on-site management team is huge part of that. They're upholding their promise of a quality, well-kept, well-managed community. Market rents achieved were substantially above performer rates. And then Phase 1's opening, it garnered a lot of attention. Warren Buffett and Purpose-Built Communities was there. HUD Secretary Donovan was there, and President Barack Obama actually was there and gave his formal news interview on the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina in 2010, fifth year anniversary. Last year, Columbia Park was recognized as the Multifamily Community of the Year for Pillars. Last week, I told you the website took the award, but the marketing campaign also did as well, so double awards last week. And most important of all, today Columbia Park enjoys that brand equity that I mentioned. And we're not advertising. They have a solid name, a solid reputation. The fun part to me, and I'll share it too in a second. Well, hold on, I'm getting ahead of myself. Another way we measure success is the wait list for new apartment homes. We've got a substantial wait list. People are lining up and they want to live there. We also have loyal website visitation. All time we've had almost 112,000 visits. It averages still about 3,500 web visits a month, and 35 of them are repeat visitors. Organic direct searches, and to kind of break that down, one way we know we've got great brand equity and a reputation is that people will launch their web browser, and instead of typing apartments New Orleans and finding columbiapark.com, they're typing in Columbia Park in their search engine. So over 52,000 people have done that so far. That's the name. They've got the name in their brain, and that's what they're using. We have actually at this point over 11,000 people in our email database that are receiving these monthly e-newsletters. So that's another turning mechanism at this point. And then word of mouth continues to promote interest at the community by way of those direct visits where people don't even open up a search engine, they type in columbiapark.com. So that's another way that we can start to measure, since there's no advertising out there, this is word of mouth. This is someone saying, oh yeah, the website address is this, check it out. We have over 1,800 fans on Facebook, and then as I mentioned, minimal, actually no at this point, no advertising expenses, underway at all for the project right now. So this is what I was chuckling about earlier. These are the kinds of comments we saw most recently. We're not seeing any negative ones right now, but I think the citing they use looks cheap. These were some of the comments then, after we got deep into all of this campaign and the brand work, that when an article would come out and people would start to do their little commenting, the paint colors make no sense to me. Someone didn't like the paint colors. I've heard a lot about Columbia Park, and I heard you're building senior apartments. I would love for my mom to live there. So these are the kinds of comments now that we see. And just a fun way to kind of bring it all back together. Facebook, again, social media. We asked the question, if you were going to write Columbia Park a love letter, what would it say? Instant, immediate reactions from folks within, 6 minutes at this point, or 7 minutes? And it just kept going, and they were adorable. But the one that I'll leave you with, which is cracked me up to no end, Dear Columbia Park, I can no longer stalk you from afar anymore. The time has come for me to make my move. I want to put my things inside you, sleep with you every night. What I'm trying to say is, can I move in? So hilarious, and cute. But again, I mean, we absolutely turned this huge page, in the chapter of that neighborhood in that area, and again, succeeded in creating this community before we actually built this community. There's something else I want to talk with you all about briefly too. With the senior project that they're working on there, we convened a charrette. We crowdsourced the name determination for the senior project because there was some question as to whether or not the Housing Authority thought that incorporating St. Bernard in the name made sense from a historical perspective, because it used to be a good place way back when, and of course everybody on the development team was nervous about that, because no, that's a very real, in short time ago, reputation for awful things. And so we used a charrette to basically kickstart that. We brought together seniors from the neighborhood, seniors that were former residents, and seniors that are current Columbia Park residents to take part in brainstorming and dissecting and really being our guinea pigs for asking some of these questions. And what was really interesting was, particularly on that question, out of a 2-hour time frame, they went at it. I mean, it was a great conversation between the residents. All I did was ask the question and continue to ask questions here and there, and they let it go. That lasted about half an hour. Half the room was like, no way, no how. Hell no was the actual word that one of the sweet little old ladies said. And she's like, we're in heaven now. We do not need to basically incorporate hell in this name. And the other half of the room was saying, well, yeah, I remember way back when, like that photo I shared, 1945, when it was a great place to live and good families lived here and it was a safe place to live. So again, it starts to show you just how crowdsourcing as well can start to play a really important part, and it's easy to do, but helping to come about and bring about decisions that you need to make. So community engagement factor is huge, and it shouldn't begin and end with design and planning charrettes. That's been done for a long time now. Start thinking about it in terms of, how can you incorporate charrettes and crowdsourcing and people into your process when you're then devising a name for this place, a brand for this place, or making any other decisions that you feel comfortable that, hey, there's 2 or 3 good options here. No matter what they determine, we're going to feel safe with this. What do you have to lose in doing that? So again, I'd just love to open it up for questions now.
What was the name they decided on?
It was Heritage. heritage at Columbia Park. And what was also important about that was in that discussion, they talked a lot about that Columbia Park had a great reputation, and some of it too was like, can it just be senior residences at Columbia Park? I mean, they wanted to attach onto Columbia Park. It was not a status symbol, but it had a great connotation. So that became just further proof that we needed to frame this in a way, because it was a different aspect of the community, but it still needed to tie into this formidable brand that was created that people are happy with. So.
I just want to remind everybody of their evaluations around the room if you don't have one on hand yet. And if you would fill them out and then hand them to me on your way out. Hand them to me on your way out, or leave them on your table or your chair. I'll
Okay.
pick them up.
Do you-
Thanks.
Sorry. Do you see yourself reproducing this project in New Orleans somewhere? Or are there properties that are vanquished that need rehabilitation?
Elements of it, but I think it goes against every fiber in my body to ever cookie cut approach things.
I'm
But
not saying
but the theories behind it, absolutely, and particularly that plan. I mean, the best, I think, just again, redevelopment plans always have to build upon and enhance the community attributes and the features.
Absolutely.
And like, for instance, with Columbia Park, they have a splash playground there for the kids to play with, and they went to a lot of effort to design it to look like musical instruments and a keyboard. And it's because Fats Domino lived in the neighborhood way back when. I mean, so there was a lot in that. And so I think the more effort and care you take to weave in those nuances that make a neighborhood, the better off everybody's going to be. And to me, it's all about respect as well, and but I think in terms of the crowdsourcing side, absolutely. And for that exercise that we did, that developer now, that's the way they're approaching every project now with us. And we're getting started earlier and earlier. What we're doing right now, for instance, we've got a new project we're working on in New Orleans with a subsidiary of Volunteers of America. They're doing an affordable housing project at a adaptive reuse site, which used to be an old warehouse for a steamship company. And it's in the Lower Garden District. The neighborhood does not want affordable housing. They have fought them tooth and nail for a very long time. But the project's advancing now. And so we know there's sentiment there that we need to pay attention to. And so the first thing that we're doing, we have a list of 3 names then that the development team's we're happy with, and we're going to put that out for crowdsourcing.
I'm glad I made an error in using the word replicate, because as a former mine reclamation engineer, every single site is different.
Mm-hmm.
And
But I know what you mean. Yeah, absolutely.
Very good answer.
Yeah, but definitely there's a lot of, I think, processes that just are logical. But the fun part, I think, in the one word of just ideas to leave you guys with is just think about this as a way to start creating community before you're even really going vertical. I mean, by site signage alone and online presence and social media, what can you put out to people so that they can start to put their thumbprint on it, get engaged, and feel like they're a part of what's going to happen, not they're living next to what's going to happen. So, yes.
I think a lot of us gray hairs think that social media takes a lot of time. Can you share with us what's involved in this kind of?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to kind of break it down into nuts and bolts, with Columbia Park at its heyday, like the prime time when we were in lease-up mode, we were spending about 5 to 8 hours a week on social media, sometimes more depending on if we were sending something out that was going to be a little bit of a blitz. But now we're at a point where it's about an hour and a half, 2 hours a week. And part of that is planning ahead on posts that we want to make and kind of making sure that we get all that, lined up and ready to go. And then the other part of it, though, too, is making sure that the alerts are set up to be emailed to us, so that if somebody posts or somebody comments, we know that, we see it, and then we can respond right away. But it doesn't have to be extremely time intensive. Planning ahead you have to plan ahead, and you've really got to take effort and energy to make sure that you're not just creating white noise, that there's some substance behind it. But ultimately, once you start to get this going, the best thing too is whenever you're at the community level, identifying who that social butterfly is on the leasing team. every leasing team has one. There's someone who's usually really bubbly and friendly, and they use Twitter or Facebook all day long. And I've heard someone, developers say, well, how do I know they're not going to be, just sitting at work and on Facebook all day? Well, you're going to have to police that. But ultimately, if it enables you to now activate your brand and communicate and have a more, resident-facing, persona, it's worth it. It's definitely worth it. So, great question. Mm-hmm.
I think that what you've described here is a really good model for a community that's already been approved and already established, and maintaining or improving the stigma about it. But what about combating Nimbyism before the approval? Like trying to convince the neighbors, like, can we please build here?
It's a great question. There is, if you want to jot down, there's a website you can look at. I'm a fan of this development team. They've done a superb job with that. Bristol Rising, BRISTOL, rising.com. So it's Bristol, Connecticut. Just to paraphrase, basically this developer was going to be responsible for urban renewal and redevelopment of part of the downtown. And so they're going through the master planning process, and they come up with their plans. And to paraphrase, mind you, don't quote me on the exact numbers, but they might have had a building in their plan that was going to be 14 stories high. And the community went crazy. They're like, we don't want that kind of density. No way, no way. And so this developer took a step back and took a proactive crowdsourcing approach. And what they ended up doing was launching an online site, bristolrising.com, and it started with a happy hour. They found vocal people in the community, invited them to a happy hour to mix and mingle and meet each other and say, we really need your help. We know you have ideas, and they're bound to be great ones that we really need to know. And so that kind of started, it was a catalyst for this bigger movement that grew into, I believe, a couple thousand people ended up following and playing a part in this. But basically, their thrust of it was they created an initiative where they put the plan out and they're saying, we want your ideas. What should this look like? What does it need to have? What do you think? And what they ended up getting they took that information, they aggregated it, and they found there were some very common themes with this. And one of the common themes was they wanted a central park. They needed some kind of central park feature, and they didn't have that in their original development plans. And so in light of that, the developer was able to use that as a leveraging point in all of this to say, well, before you didn't want us to have anything taller than 4 stories, but now you want this central park. Well, in order for me to just make the numbers work, how about you give us 8 stories here, and we give you a central park, and it worked. So it's been very interesting, but Bristol Rising is a great example of that. And that's what we're excited about, is we've got more and more projects now that it's catching on, that developers are saying, okay, yeah. We also, Athens Housing Authority, their New Paldo project is one where we're doing very basic, very preliminary so far, but we've put the master plans. There's 2 different master plan concepts. One has different organization of where different components and features would be. Put those out for public voting and commenting as well. And so that's influencing the real steps they're going to take on what the plan looks like moving forward. So, all right. Well, we're past time, but I'll be here for any other questions you guys might have, and I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
And if you want me to send you a copy of this presentation, just grab my business card, and I actually recorded it, and I'll make a movie of it, and I can send it out to you guys.